Here we go. Ener Chiu has been with EBALDC since 2004. He has successfully completed new construction projects totaling more than 440 units of affordable rental and ownership housing in Oakland, and nearly 30,000 square feet of commercial and medical clinic space, totaling more than 200 million in development costs. He specializes in projects involving joint venture partnerships with mixed income and mixed use development programs. As the real estate development department's director, Ener currently oversees a pipeline of 7 new construction projects totaling more than 550 affordable homes. Of those 7 projects, 3 deals are joint venture programs totaling nearly 900 units in total. And for the past 13 years, Ener has been deeply involved in planning and development projects within downtown Oakland and Chinatown. As a steering committee member of the Oakland Chinatown Coalition, he organizes nonprofits, residents, and business owners and employees to advocate for planning policies and development projects that would directly benefit the people who currently live and work in Oakland, while making space for the new residents and businesses that are moving to the city. Ener is a founding member of Old Oakland Neighborhoods, founding family member of Yuming Mandarin Immersion Public Charter School, past president of the Pacific Renaissance Plaza Master Association, and past president of the Board of East Bay Housing Organizations. And he has served on the Investor Oversight Committee of the New Parkway Theater. Currently, he is a steering committee member for both the Oakland Chinatown Coalition and the Friends of Lincoln Square Park. Ener holds a master's degree in city and regional planning from UC Berkeley. Go Bears!
Go Bears!
And lives in Oakland with his wife, 2 daughters, and Pitbull. Everyone welcome Ener. Yay!
Hi, thank you so much. That's embarrassing, and I wish I wish you had let me know that you were going to read the whole thing. I would have given you the very short version of that. So sorry about that.
I probably should have condensed, but I honestly had no time today.
No, it's totally fine.
That was good.
I am wondering if I'm the host, because there's several things that I'm going to share on my screen. I think I maybe need to be the host to share video.
We've given you co-host ability.
Okay, cool. Well, I think it'll work when we get there. So let's go test this out and see how it goes. I'm sharing screen now. And okay, can you all see the screen?
Yes.
Looks great.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that very, very kind introduction that I wrote myself. Thank you for reading the very kind introduction that I wrote about myself. I work for an organization called East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation, EBALDC, which is our awkward acronym. And Margaret is actually a board member on EBALDC. Our mission at EBALDC is to build healthy communities. And primarily what that means in a really specific programmatic way is that we build affordable housing and community commercial spaces. So one of our kind of more prominent downtown Oakland buildings is Swan's Market. So many of you have probably eaten at a restaurant in Swan's pre-COVID. Maybe you've been there recently as we've been reopening. But that's one of our flagship buildings. I want to start by saying that in all caps, I am not a community safety expert. But that being said, today's topic is improving community safety in Oakland Chinatown. So we're going to see how this goes. I had hoped to do kind of a short presentation interspersed with opportunities to actually for all of us to talk and kind of share ideas and reactions. But I think just given the time that we have, I think I'm going to try and speed through some different perspectives on API safety, and especially in Chinatown, and then leave time at the end to discuss a bit about kind of what actions we can take to improve the climate of safety in our community. I had another thing that I had hoped to do today was to introduce my father-in-law, Waylon Eng. He, I don't think is on the Zoom. I think he may have had problems getting into the Zoom, which is fine. He also has better things to do, I think, probably than listen to me talk. Waylon is just an amazing guy. He's born in Oakland in the 1940s, grew up in the 40s and 50s in Oakland, Chinatown, and Old Oakland. This is Waylon here at the center of this photo, which was taken in the 1950s, in the house where he spent part of his childhood, and he's surrounded by 4 generations of his family before this house was taken and demolished to build Lake Merritt BART station in the 1960s. His father here, Raymond Dang, was the first elected API council member in Oakland, one of the first in California. He actually served alongside Frank Ogawa of Frank Ogawa Plaza fame, who was actually, Mr. Ogawa was actually the first API to serve as council member in Oakland, but he was appointed to his first term. Waylon's mom was a Rosie the Riveter, who worked up in Richmond during World War II. The reason I wanted to introduce him is just that he has been involved in Rotary for over 30 years and served as president of the Orinda chapter in 2017 and 18. And he's always impressed on me what an amazing organization Rotary is, and how, and I think it's so important, these social and these service clubs that we have are so important in terms of community building and building connections between people. So I just applaud you, and I want to thank you for inviting me to speak a little today. So again, our topic today is kind of a downer, given how much laughter you guys started with. But it's really about community safety in Chinatown. This issue, though, is happening in the context of a lot bigger trends happening across the country and in Oakland. You can see the kind of the types of harassment and discrimination here that APIs are starting to report on and provide data on now. While physical assaults, which is kind of the main thing that we'll be talking about today, is only 12.6% of this kind of the data that was reported. Unfortunately, this data was up, that data point was up by 64%. So physical assaults, or at least reports of physical assaults, increased year on year by 64% from the previous year. And if we look at kind of where this kind of stuff was happening, if we take away the online and the private residence pieces of this bar chart, we see that about 82% of these kinds of incidents were happening in public places, places where you would expect and hope that other people would be around to help or intervene. And so the inevitable result of this increased harassment and violence is that our streets are emptier. People are afraid and therefore choosing not to leave their homes. So I'm going to come back to this point just a little bit later. But I want to kind of circle back around and say that targeted anti-Asian violence is unfortunately, it's not new. Part of the challenge about talking about anti-API violence is that we need a couple of layers of context. Waylon's great-grandmother, who is also pictured here, was orphaned in the Sierra foothills gold mining town in the 1860s, when white mobs had a bad habit of burning down Chinese camps and lynching Chinese workers in order to kill and intimidate people who were considered economic competitors. We see this history play out again in the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the burnings of urban Chinatowns in California in the early 20th century, and in court cases that denied us citizenship, in World War II era internment, and in the previous presidential administration's well-documented efforts to drastically reduce undocumented and legal immigration from countries that might be considered poor or, quote, difficult to integrate. And so the lesson that I've taken away from that historical narrative and how it meets where we are today is that it is always easier to blame others, blame people, blame other people, folks who we consider as outsiders for our problems, rather than face up to our own structural and social problems that we've created for ourselves. The other point of context that's really important as we talk about anti-API violence is that violent crime increased everywhere in America dramatically in 2020. Homicides spiked up about 37% in many major metropolitan areas as a whole. Oakland, you can see, was pretty in line with that increase, up around 38%. Homicides have also begun spiking. This is a 20-year kind of perspective on where homicides have been in Oakland. You can see we kind of reached low points, relatively speaking, low points in 2017 and 2018. And then things have crept up again, not quite to the point where they were in 2011, 2012, or 2005, 2006. Those were all-time highs, I think. But but it's trending in the wrong direction, unfortunately. And another piece of context, I think, as we talk about API violence, is anti-API violence, is that we are not isolated as a community, and in fact, the level of anti-API violence in Oakland is relatively low when we compare it to other things. And I think that's important because there was a point in time for the last 6 months where a lot of media oxygen kind of went to this topic, and it shouldn't overshadow. It's important, and it's important to understand the specifics of it, but it's also important that it doesn't overshadow things that are really, really happening in other neighborhoods, primarily in East Oakland, which has become just a real just killing zone, unfortunately, is the only way to say it. The vast majority of homicides in Oakland over that kind of 6-month period between September 2020 and March 21 were really focused around the vast areas of East Oakland here, which are struggling with a lot of things. Poverty, it is the highest impacted area in Alameda County in terms of COVID, both infection rates and deaths. It is just ground zero for a lot of really kind of problematic trends that have been happening. So why am I bringing this up when we're supposed to be talking about anti-API violence and safety in Chinatown? I'm bringing it up because the specifics of anti-API violence and safety are important to understand, but we can't understand its periodic spikes and valleys without also trying to understand the overall context, the historical, the political, the economic, the social, the racial dynamics, which underlie how we treat one another in this society, how we view and how we support or grind down vulnerable individuals and groups. So Oakland, Chinatown, I'm coming back now to our problem that I mentioned earlier of kind of empty streets around Oakland, Chinatown. And it's problematic for a lot of different reasons. First of all, it's bad for business. I saw reports during COVID that business receipts from non-grocery stores in Oakland, Chinatown were down 50 to 75% in that time. It was also bad for workers who had to make difficult decisions and sometimes choose between their health or their incomes. And beyond economics, COVID and our violent behavior was terrible because we lost a lot of practice in using our social muscles. The things that Jolene, I think, or someone was talking about, someone on this call was talking about being neighborly. And I apologize, I forget, maybe it was Josephine, I think, that was talking about that. We've forgotten just kind of what's like to run into friends on the street and figuring out how to relate to and deal with everyday strangers that we run into our neighborhoods, some of whom are just fine and pleasant, and some of them who have issues and challenges. The stupid debate that we had in this country about wearing masks or not wearing masks, it was really about whether or not we cared enough about the people around us to make simple and only slightly inconvenient gestures to help keep all of us safer. COVID really forced us to reckon with a social safety net that was totally inadequate to meet the situation and showed how much this country cares about our most vulnerable populations, which is not enough. So what is EBALDC doing about this situation in Oakland, Chinatown? Well, we really had a unique opportunity because of the relatively small geography that is Oakland, Chinatown. As a neighborhood, it's only 3/4 of a square mile in size, or about 1% of the total city size, which is about 75 square miles. But we're actually a very dense neighborhood with over 5% of the city's total population. So we also we're lucky in that we have a really dense network of community organizations, many of whom EBALDC has partnered with and worked with for decades. And also interestingly, in terms of kind of the potential for impact that EBALDC can have, we are probably the largest single non-public property owner in Chinatown. So that gives us a lot of opportunity to impact kind of a relatively small area. That dense network of nonprofits and social and community organizations was really helpful. In 2017, Asian Health Services, AHS, and Asian Prisoners Support Committee APSC, helped to start an ambassador program. And I'm going to play a video in a few minutes about introducing what that ambassador program was. In 2018, they officially launched. Part of what EBALDC did was to try and get that program, which Asian Health Services was just kind of using within their organization. We tried to get that launched into kind of a bigger kind of neighborhood-wide focus. And so we got them to focus on kind of 4 square blocks within Chinatown and just provide services. And again, this will be better introduced by the video that I show in a couple of minutes. Unfortunately, in 2020, we had to kind of really ramp things down because of COVID. People were just not out on the streets anymore. And we just did not have the bandwidth. We were dealing with so many emergencies as part of COVID. We really didn't have the bandwidth or the resources to keep up the ambassador program on the streets to really counteract a lot of the emptying out of the streets that we were talking about. So this year in 2021, we really have an opportunity to reinvigorate the Chinatown Ambassador Program, or CAP. And we're looking to form a community benefits district to really make permanent the parts of the CAP that we want to keep. Does everyone know what a community benefits district is? Or it's akin to a business improvement district in a lot of ways, a BID or a CBD. And what we're hoping to do is essentially create it's like a kind of a small incremental tax on your property tax bill that property owners would get. And that very, very small increment, it's about, for a condo owner, it might be around $200 a year. And then if you're a large property owner like EBALDC is, I think EBALDC is going to end up putting about $65,000 a year from several of our different properties, our operating budgets. We're going to contribute that much to the CBD, and that'll raise about $1.3 million in total. And so we're talking about taking the Chinatown Ambassador Program, which was funded in the tens of thousands of dollars a year with lots of volunteers, very scrappy, very kind of bootstrapped kind of grassroots effort, and making it into a program that's really fully resourced to be able to run and operate at a high level over kind of throughout the Chinatown neighborhood. Okay, so I'm gonna just wrap up kind of my presentation with where we go from here. Part of what we're trying to do in Oakland Chinatown is to have a set of folks who can help be that everyday presence that helps us exercise that social muscle again a little bit more intentionally than we've been able to do. And so the folks that we're looking at working with through the ambassador program, these are in many cases guys, mostly guys, but some women who've had really intense kind of life experiences. And I think by going through a rehab process kind of while they were imprisoned, some of them, not all, but some of them have really come out and had a level of kind of desire to make amends for some of their previous actions. And not only do that, but they have a skill set that makes them able to empathize with people at a lot of different points in their life. So one of the most effective things the ambassadors have done, really, like a lot of the folks who are wandering around the streets with kind of mental health issues or who are homeless, the ambassador program, when it was up and running, one of the things that it did very successfully was to really just get to know who some of those homeless folks were, get to know their names, get to know their situation, and act as almost like street case managers. So that when folks had episodes that were making people around them feel unsafe, they could really come in, ambassadors could really come in and kind of de-escalate a situation without having to involve the police. So this is the program that we would love to make a permanent part of our Chinatown community through kind of the formation of the CBD. It's coming. We just took a poll in the balloting phase right now of the CBD. So I think if 30% of the owners within the district kind of affirm it, then we will be forming the CBD as of, I think, probably end of this year, beginning of next year. So we're currently in the balloting phase, and on July 20th, there'll be a vote. The vote count will happen, and then it'll get ratified by city council at city council meeting. So that's where we are again right now. And you can see that this is the geography that we're hoping that the ambassadors are kind of going to be able to kind of work in. So it's a pretty large geography, but again, it's only 3/4 of a square mile, and we'll have teams of folks out there essentially doing like environmental improvement projects, like cleaning graffiti, sweeping streets, collecting trash, doing basic kind of small public worksy type things. And our experience was that prior to 2019, like those activities really improved street safety and street quality of life for some of our most vulnerable people, whether they were seniors or whether they were homeless folks, and really prevented a lot of police calls that did not get to need to get escalated to police presence. This program, the individuals in this program were able to kind of intervene at an earlier stage before it became a law enforcement issue. So I guess I'd like to end with, before we get into kind of discussions and questions, on kind of how you can help. Well, the first thing is that right now during the summer, we have a Chinatown Ambassador Volunteers kind of strolling program where folks can sign up and just stroll around Chinatown between 10 a.m. and 12:30, get a little bit of instruction from the small ambassador team that we currently have. That small ambassador team is currently funded and employed by Family Bridges, which is an organization in Oakland, Chinatown that has really focused. They do so many things. They run a childcare center and they have kind of senior services in the neighborhood. They are now running, they also run the homeless community cabin site at 6th and Oak. And a lot of the former Chinatown ambassadors are actually employed running that site right now. And we'd like to get them back out onto our streets as a sort of, de facto kind of urban problem solvers, and with an attitude that I like to describe as aggressively helpful. We just want these folks back out on the street in their high visibility vests, providing services, answering questions, collecting data, chaperoning people, making sure that people get to and from where they want to go safely. So you can help by not only volunteering to walk, but also making a donation to Family Bridges at their donation site. Their donation site is a little wonky. It's not that it's hard to find, but if you go to Family Bridges website, you'll hit donate, and this is what you'll see. If you scroll to the bottom of their page, at the bottom of the page, you'll see on the left bar a tiny little button that says donate to the ambassador program. So that's one thing that you can do to help. The other thing that you can do is donate to EBALDC. EBALDC, the organization that I work at, we have been putting together COVID resources to help both tenants and small businesses, commercial tenants who have been impacted by COVID. So we have a little fund at EBALDC that we've been both grant fundraising for and just community fundraising for to help with folks who are have had a really, really tough kind of transitional year in the past year. And then the last thing, which I actually had hoped to kind of get into more of a community discussion with folks here on, is really about the budget. So perhaps some of you all are kind of bigger budget nerds than I am. I am not, unfortunately, a very, very kind of in-depth budget nerd. But what's happening essentially is that Mayor Schaaf has put out a budget back in early May for the city of Oakland, and about a month later, a little bit more than a month later, the council president, Nikki Fortunato-Bass, put out some recommended amendments. Got together a team of other council members and put together recommended amendments to the mayor's proposed budget. And the crux of at least a lot of I think the big picture kind of visioning questions are around the role of policing and how much we need policing or don't need policing. in our neighborhoods to do this, to keep our community safe. This is obviously like a super touchy subject, and I don't think I have really kind of one size fits all answer for which way to go on the budget, but I think it's a really important conversation for all of us as Oakland residents or Oakland people who do business in Oakland to really get engaged in. So I really encourage you in the week plus that we have left to at least get to know the budgets at a high level and understand kind of and call your council members and advocate for the kind of budget that you want to see, the kind of level of police resources that we think we need. My personal take on this is just that we will never have enough patrols to help us feel safe and to really kind of feel safe at as safe as we want to feel at every corner of our city. And so what we need to start doing is start building out the infrastructure for community safety to happen in a lot of different ways, ways that are frankly a lot cheaper than what the police department is offering us. And so that's really the vision of the Chinatown Ambassador Program, is to take things off of the police's plate so that they can focus with better attention and more intentionality around the things that we really want police to focus on, which is violent crime in Oakland. I don't think we need them acting as social workers or case workers for homeless folks that might be having episodes on the street. I don't think we need them responding to kind of things that animal control should be taking out, or necessarily writing tickets or towing vehicles. I think there's other people, less expensive people, who can really get staffed up and get resourced to take care of those problems so that OPD can really focus on what's necessary for the police, which is violent crime once again. So I really hope that whatever your stance on this, that you really get involved in budget conversations around safety and policing in Oakland. So with that, I just want to thank everyone again for just inviting me here and allowing me to speak for a little bit of time and introduce what we're doing in Oakland Chinatown. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ener. I appreciate, prefacing, it's not, when you mentioned, we're talking about community safety, but not being the expert. I think as Rotary, we also don't have all the answers either, but I think it's a great conversation to have in light of our recent event. The focus is on peace and building peace, but we do have to have the difficult conversations. How do we actually achieve that? And, making sure that everyone feels safe in the community. So I really appreciate you presenting that. Did anyone in our club have questions? I know we're not a quiet bunch. Hold on. Group gallery view.
I know I have a question.
Sure.
The strolling event is Mondays 10 to 12:30 or something like that in there. Is that a particular time that more crime has happened, Monday mornings, or it was just?
I don't think so. I think it was a time that where we could get an ambassador freed up to kind of help train up some volunteers and stuff. It's issue of capacity as opposed to kind of a really direct data-driven response to a particular issue. But crime, violent crime, I think, has upticked during the middle of the day, during time periods where we used to not see that. We used to see it only in evenings and, kind of towards the periphery of the neighborhood. And in recent months, it's been happening kind of more in the center part of the neighborhood as well. And so it's an effort to just kind of address that with kind of more people on the streets, more people being neighborly, being helpful with folks around. So.
What do you think of the bill that was passed by the government, the federal government, about, stop Asian hate? I don't know the details because I've been really busy, but what do you think of that bill? Do you think it's just more of a?
It's kind of a no-brainer. I think it's just, just a.
It's awareness, but it's not a direct fix.
Yeah, yeah. I think what the Biden administration what's been encouraging about the Biden administration as part of their kind of infrastructure plan proposal is that, that they're really looking at making kind of real investments in kind of alternative safety infrastructure, violence interrupters, things that can help to build out an infrastructure of service that is kind of adjacent to and parallel to maybe someday replacing kind of the work that police do. And I want to be really very, very clear about just my position on this is that I am not, I'm not a, you know, I think that policing is done poorly in many ways, but we need the police. Like, there is no other institution in our society that is designed for and capable of addressing kind of violent harm. Like we will have that, and we need that. The question is really more, to me, is like, what's the right balance of it? Like, what do we need police for, and what do we just need to recognize that police are not very good at dealing with because they're not trained for it? Because you can't expect, I don't know, the analogy that I get is like, you know, if we have the world's best history teacher, we can't expect her to, you know, also start teaching math. And then the next year add on, hey, you're such a great teacher, let's have you start teaching English also. Like, that's not like a good use of her talent or her skill or her training. And so I think what I hope comes out of this conversation is that we start establishing better and clearer roles and responsibilities for what we want our different public institutions to do, and give ourselves kind of the, just give ourselves the institutional and social infrastructure to really kind of deal with problems in a really specific way and an intentional way. So.
Matthew, did you have a question?
Oh, yeah, I did. Thank you. Also, thank you, Ener, for that wonderful presentation that you gave. I had read your a Vox article where you were briefly interviewed in, and they were talking a little bit about this problem. And
yeah,
one thing that they had brought up was that there was a sort of generational divide between the opinion of like funding the police in Oakland Chinatown. I was wondering, how do you see that generational divide?
Yeah, well, as someone who's not young anymore, like not young anymore, I see it from both angles very clearly. I think I just want to say, look, I'm a 43-year-old guy. I'm reasonably fit. I am not a particularly vulnerable target. So my view of whether we need more policing or less policing is informed by my situation. If I were a 70-year-old person who is more frail, 80-year-old person who's more frail, who has to walk, you know, at all times of day in the streets, I might want to look over my shoulder and see a police officer. That might be comforting to me. If I were a 20-year-old kid, maybe if I were, and I obviously have been a 20-year-old kid before, but if I grew up in an era of stop and frisk and I'd say overly aggressive warrior style policing, and if I were African-American or Latino or Native American, I might have a really different view of safety around, like, whether if I look over my shoulder and see a police officer, like, how safe do I feel? And so I think that diversity of viewpoints is really, really kind of important to understand, to empathize with, and to really listen to and respect all of those kind of points of view. And so I think what I would say for the folks who are frail is that we need to present an alternative to policing before taking police off the streets. And we have to make sure that that alternative really works, and it works for our most vulnerable people, and that it doesn't make the injustices that we have worse for the people who are targeted by police in general. We need to have that system in place before we really kind of actively defund it. Sorry, that's my editorial opinion. in case that wasn't clear.
Brett, go ahead.
First of all, thank you for that viewpoint. I I think that was said in a very balanced and thoughtful way. I appreciate it. So there's only one API person on the city council and not from Oakland Chinatown. Do
There's
you
two.
think- There's two? Who's
Yeah.
the other one?
Nikki Fortunato Bass is the president of the council, and
Right.
Sheng Tao is the councilwoman from District 4.
And Nikki Bass, Fortunato Bass, is that Filipino or?
Yes, she's Filipino.
Okay, so I take that back then. Do you think, I mean, from what I've observed being somebody in Oakland, there's been this pull that has always been between the black and whites and the issues that are facing there. And it's sort of
Sure.
like the Chinatown has been isolated in part because of itself, because the strong cultural ties that Chinatown has had, and it's a lot of the elements that are there that maintains that cultural strength and stronger frankly, bonding of the family. Do you feel that the city actually fairly represents the interest of Oakland Chinatown sufficiently that allows you the opportunity to be addressing many of these things? Or do you think that you are the third and perhaps weakest leg of the stool that is pulling for direction in Oakland?
That's a really big question with probably a really complex answer. But what I hear you asking is, what I hear you asking is, and it's not just in Oakland, it's historically in this country, like race has been viewed as very black and white. And so there's a very, very strong, I think, tradition of in kind of API political history of kind of establishing what that Asian American identity is and how it fits with whiteness or blackness or just being a person of color. And it's a very complex legacy that I took a class on 30 years ago, but I thought a lot about. But I would say this: the reason I started with kind of the historical overview of that we are not just living in a moment of anti-API violence. We have a historical, in this country, we have a historic track record of anti-API violence that is driven sometimes by individual bias, and prejudice, but more often it is driven by policy and political ideologues, demagogues, excuse me, political demagogues who have taken kind of API, our perpetual foreignness, and exploited it as, scapegoats. And that's been done pretty consistently over history. And so in Oakland, I would say we have a very, very complex racial history that we have to reckon with in Oakland. Oakland's founders, the people in power, the people that we named kind of early buildings after, were white and rich. And African Americans came in large part to work, pre-World War II, during World War II, immediately after World War II, and became a majority African American city. And as our city has gentrified, as we have continued to lock out kind of African Americans from kind of property ownership effectively for the last 75 years, African American people have moved out, to the point where we went from a majority to now under 20% is likely going to be in the newest census. And APIs have kind of slowly crept up, and then in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, our numbers kind of really went up. So I think Oakland is a city that is constantly in flux racially and socially. And we're just learning, we just have to learn to figure out like what are the issues that we all kind of can work on together. And I think community safety is an issue that impacts all of us very, very deeply. And yeah, we need to find common ground on it. That's a very vague. I'm so sorry for that answer. That sounds so.
Ener, can I chime in?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so Brad, I would say that I in the beginning during COVID, I was watching a lot of presentations by the city around who was being impacted by COVID, for example.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I was really surprised at the lack of, it was always Black and Latinx they were talking about in the presentations. And I was like, really? I mean, a third of the population, at least in Chinatown, I mean, in Oakland is Asian American. So I saw people raising their hands throughout the presentations going, hey, you've got an omission here. And I've been really shocked at the latest numbers that are coming out saying the impact is outsized in the AAPI community around COVID. And it was just, I'm sure it wasn't intentional, but this model minority myth of like the Asians are not really a minority sometimes still permeates in omissions of mentioning or focusing on numbers. And I felt it at the beginning, and I saw it at the mayor's presentations, and I saw people speaking up from the community, and I was concerned.
Thank you. That's such a better answer than what I gave. I so appreciate you saying that. Thank you, Margaret.
The background of the question of why I was asking it is I grew up and had been multi-generations in Hawaii. And so when I grew up, it was an Asian environment, whether it was Japanese, Filipino, Chinese. And it wasn't until we moved here and we noticed the difference. In fact, we celebrated the difference and we learned words from each other, and it was street language that combined all these. But when I moved here, all of a sudden, Black and white became a really discernible line. And you're right, from my perspective as a kid, all the Asian parts fell away. It wasn't until I really found a home in Berkeley that I found much more of an influence. It felt like the islands that had that equality. But what it really taught me was the cultural establishment. In Hawaii, everybody kind of came in as equals. I mean, they came in tiers during the immigration waves. But in the Bay Area, it fundamentally became stratified by who was originally here and who was originally where the wealth was established and where the principles were established. So, and I know a number of people and worked with a number of people out of Chinatown, and partly because of the background and knowing some of the connections. But to your point, Margaret, it kind of has always felt like that was a voice that wasn't present at the table in many of the discussions.
Not for lack of trying, but just because people tend to forget.
Yeah.
Right? Or not hear or not see. So that's my personal opinion, not Ener's, not EBALDC's, but my observation has been that there's a list and people get tired of talking of that list after number 2 gets mentioned, and that's not okay.
No.
It is a significant population of the city.
Yeah, no, Margaret, I fully agree.
Well, I appreciate your answers. Thank you.
Well, Ener, as a thank you for coming to speak with us, we are going to donate some vaccines in your name in our efforts to end polio now. I know you know a little bit maybe about our mission because of your father-in-law, but Rotary has been committed to ending polio, and it's now only endemic in Pakistan and in Afghanistan. And I think, I don't have the number at the top of my head, but I know at this point, I think we're going to be donating about 300 vaccines this year in total with all the speakers that we've had. So thank you very much for your time and contributing to this, but also leading the discussion. It's an important one we need to have that isn't talked about often enough.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Really appreciate it.
Rotary.